Welcome to all of you for the second time today. We had a fascinating discussion, I thought, this morning with the group of students from NUS. This was great. I could get used to that kind of style of doing teaching and engagement across the time zones. It was great. It was great. So we have a full plate of to offer you today, including guest who is with us. Tony Hall. And so I will make my comments very brief. And then Doug is going to follow after me. And after that, Tony Hall. And then Tony Blair is going to complete the circle. So, what I wanted just to briefly mention and highlight, and it seems to me, at least also from our reading throughout the course, but in particular also for today's session, it seems to me that both faith tradition and the advocates of economic globalization, they have an interest. There's interest in improving the lot of the poor, right? Both the market economy and its version of economic globalization contains a promise to lift people out of poverty, but also it kind of has a history of betrayal of the poor, right? History of either in the process of marching onward, leaving people dislocated, unsure about their destinies and so forth, or even, if one looked at the large map of the world, leaving certain, even whole continents untouched, at least as of yet, one might say. I think that's also true of the faith traditions. On the one hand, just about all the faith traditions emphasize concern for the poor, for the needy. That's at the heart of many of the faiths. Not necessarily the thing at the heart, but one of the most important things that faiths are concerned with. And yet, as we've read also in our reading for today, especially kind of critique from the liberation theologian side of things, there's also a long history of betrayal of that mission of the poor and siding with those who are powerful in kind of unconcerned with what's going on the ground where people in fact suffer. And I think maybe it would be good for us to think in terms of both in the light of both this promise and also a failure and betrayal, to think maybe that for both faith and globalization, it might be good to think that the effects of both of these on the poor and on the weak are one of the criteria, important criteria, how we judge both faiths and globalization processes. And I think the background for that might be, a background presupposition might be that, and maybe that's controversial, but that's how I would put it, that a humanity of a system or humanity of a society is measured by how it treats its weakest members. And if that's the case, that provides us quite an important, a criterion is maybe too strong and too kind of clearly formulated, but at least a guideline in terms of how to assess the performance, quote unquote, of both faith traditions and economic side of globalization processes. Second comment that I want to make concerns the notion of what it means to be poor and what it means to be wealthy. That's, I think, among many other things that faith traditions contribute to this whole debate, is one of these things. You can put it differently also. You can ask the question, now you'll smile, laugh, because you've heard me ask that question many times, what's the wealth for, right? I asked the question, what's the whole economic system for? But also, what is wealth for? Put differently, how it fits into the larger account of what it means to lead one's life well. And especially if we distinguish between, if we say that human flourishing has two formal components, as I said before, life going well for one and life being led well. Now, we can all agree that it's hard to argue that life is going well for one if they live on $1 a day, right? Or even less in many cases, no access to health and so forth. So the concern for reaching a certain threshold of wealth so as to be able to be nourished, to be able to have opportunities to thrive, all of us would agree on this. in terms of constituting kind of poverty, kind of bottom line, absolute almost poverty. But I think it's very important for religious folks from religious perspective to think about what constitutes then wealth and what constitutes poverty above that threshold. And I think one can distinguish in most of the traditions something like what I might call the two types of people, right? One type of person is not enough person, no matter what you've got. And how you fare, you're just not enough. It's always needs to be more, right? And always more than enough person, right? Now, always more than enough person is really a funny thing to invoke in today, right? It seems counter to many of the basic intuitions we have about how the whole world and wealth creation is being run. But in just about all religious traditions, there is something like that of more than enough kind of a person. I think that's behind some of the detachment ideas in Buddhism, in Hinduism. That's certainly behind the idea of contentment, whether that's a Stoic version of contentment or that's a Christian version of other religious versions of contentment. And it would seem to me that something of that sort needs to be there for people actually to be willing to engage in care for the poor. If you're simply concerned about yourself and if you see yourself as not enough person, what will take you outside of yourself in order to reach out, whether that's reaching out in giving others, whether that's reaching out in creating conditions where they could thrive, whatever that might be. I think poverty alleviation presumes people who are, well, just slightly more than enough people, at least, right? Who are able to give, engage with the question and problem of poverty, whether that's on large structural level or very small personal level. I think that's all that I want to say, and I'll pass it on now to Doug.